there anything normal about having pain on your period?
No pain is ever normal. It's a sign of something else.
This is Nat Kringoudis, also known as the Hormone Revolutionist. She is a passionate advocate for women's health, empowering women to understand their bodies. She's also a trusted voice in the media, featuring on The Morning Show, Claire and Cosmo Health magazines, and author of 3 books.
What are some of the things that they're like, I want to have kids and I'm struggling?
Your period is your monthly report card. So firstly, what is your menstrual cycle telling you? Is it regular? Can you tell when you're ovulating? Research does tell us that the more delayed it is that you take birth control, the less problematic it seems to be. If you turned your phone off an hour before and you had a little bit of a nighttime routine, let's just see if you actually achieved less. I bet you actually achieved more. The other thing a lot of people get caught up on is organic. And so organic doesn't necessarily mean it's better.
Period pains, that seems a little bit like a normalized sort of statement. I've heard you talk about this a little bit before. Is there anything normal about having pain on your period?
I mean, I don't know how many things you've heard me say about period pain, but one thing I have said and people tend to find a little bit funny or have a bit of a giggle is if a man had a pain in the end of his penis every month, I think you'd do something about it.
Maybe.
Or maybe your wife would make you do something about it. But I think we've just accepted period pain as being something that a woman has, and no pain is ever normal. It's a sign of something else. So if you have pain anywhere else, you'd go and explore that, and period pain's no different. So I think it's important to say it's common, but it's not normal. And no pain, it's a warning sign. Your body's always feeding out warning signs, and it's whether or not we're listening. So no, it's not, doesn't have to be there, I think is the best thing that both men and women need to know, because often men feel helpless when their wife is in pain or partner's in pain or girlfriend or whoever. And it's important that I think that we have that conversation, because I even know, my mum used to say to me, "Oh, Nat, I'm so sorry, it just sucks to be a woman." That was her answer, because she'd been told that it's normal. So it's really important to have the conversation. It's really important to explore why you have pain, and also know that it's actually really treatable. It's not that hard to treat, but it is very proportionate to our modern lifestyles.
So what are some of the things that are kind of causing that pain commonly?
I would say when I talk about causes, they're always stresses. Right? And we see stress as being busy or overworked, which is a stress for sure. But it's also environmental, it's toxin exposure, it's emotional health, trauma, pretty much you can stack a whole lot of factors that contribute. The trick is figuring out which one for you is the most important to start with first. And it's very hard often when we're feeling, if we've got a lot of these triggers, I call them switches. You've got enough switches flicked on, pain occurs. We've got to flick some of those off or turn them off so that that doesn't happen anymore. And even nutrition, something as basic as starting with nutrition, which no one's going to sit here and go, "Oh, wow, that was revolutionary. She talked about nutrition and pain," but we still do it. We're still thinking, "Oh, I can get away with a little bit of this or a little bit of that." It could be an intolerance. I see this a lot. I've just stepped out of clinic to come here and talk to you today. And I had a patient who was experiencing severe pain, and it turned out she was intolerant to oats and almonds. Now, every morning, what was she having? She was having porridge with almond milk. And so she's done a full transformation just from knowing that they're the foods that were triggering or contributing to inflammation. Now, it's not always going to just be one food, but that can be a factor as well. So it's important to really decode what it is. It's always stress of some kind. And again, also just even our modern lifestyles. Back when I first started treating women's health, I didn't choose women's health. I mean, let's be honest. Who wants to treat hormonal women all day long? Like,
I wouldn't be putting my hand up.
I remember one day saying, I had a business partner many years ago, and I remember saying to her, "I don't want to treat women's health. Could you imagine?" And then here we are almost 20 years later, and that's what we do. We treat women's health. But it was because so many women wanted answers, and they weren't getting clear answers as to why they were experiencing pain, or they'd been diagnosed with something like PCOS or endometriosis, or just feeling premenstrual. And so I went down a rabbit hole many years ago because they weren't getting answers, and the conclusion was that it was a direct result of our modern day lifestyle, and science and medicine hadn't caught up to that yet. And I still think we're far behind in recognizing how much of an impact that has. Your environment dictates how your genes behave. Your environment dictates how your body responds. So it's not a shock, I don't think, to say most women will be able to think about the last time, or if they had a horrible period, "Oh yeah, it was a really stressful month." It's
like leading into that.
Correct. Yeah, leading into it. And women will come in and say, "Oh, I've been on holiday and my period was fine." So it's
Funny about that.
Correct. So it's like, well, how do we emulate that, or what are the things that we can do to try and bring that into your daily living? Because we've also glorified stress. A lot of us have adopted the idea that if we're not stressed, we're not going to get a job done, we're not going to be successful, and it couldn't be further from the truth. But how do you show somebody that if they're so used to living their life in fight or flight?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of moving parts. But I think the biggest thing is stress, and it's the one thing that we actually have to get conscious of because we've become very good at being unconsciously stressed.
Yeah.
We just autopilot. It's just there. We wake up and we're on all day, and we think that that's a measure of success, but it's going to show up in various places, and pain is definitely one.
I guess it's interesting. I talked with Dr. Dean Miller, he's a sleep specialist, and he talks about like your performance off the base of decreased sleep, that becomes your new standard. So you just get so used to it. And I imagine it's very similar here. It's like a female would be like, oh, but I feel fine. It's like, yeah, but your fine is lower than what it should be. So just because that's your new baseline doesn't mean that's where it should be either.
And women get very good at coping with pain. They get very, very good at it. And not only do then they start experiencing period pain, but then they might have mid-cycle pain, and then they might have headaches before the period, and it just starts to have this flow-on effect. So you're right, we do get used to it. And I think we're all different, but many women are very tough. They will have to tough it out. They're also tough because no one's ever told them that they can actually treat it, which is heartbreaking and such a disservice. And I think it's because the system is actually flawed. There's no one joining it together going, you go to your doctor and tell them that you've got period pain, and unfortunately what your doctor has in their toolkit is birth control usually to mask symptoms. Now, that might be a solution, but it might not be. Not every woman can take birth control. A lot of women don't feel great on it, and that's interesting too. Usually their hormone imbalance actually speaks to the fact or a reason why they don't feel great taking it, yet that's what the prescription is. So, I think I look forward to the day where we are able to integrate modalities and really get a whole picture when it comes to treating somebody. But yeah, you're right. We have, again, to the point, we're conditioned to think it's normal, and we've got to suck it up and we've got to get on with it. And also to that point too, when we don't listen and rest when our body needs rest to recover, we set the cycle up to happen again. So not only are we're suffering, we're setting ourselves up each month to fail again and again and again. So scaffolding around that becomes really important as well. If you know you're not your best at that time, how do we scaffold around that? We do the bare minimum, we take care of ourselves, we might introduce different nutrition and supplements at that time, and really get savvy with where you are in your menstrual cycle to know what you should be doing at that time.
Yeah. So does that come into even, obviously I'm a PT training background sort of thing. I've heard people, fly around the terms of, luteal phase. That's where we should ramp up volume or I believe, or the intensity. I'm not an expert, but is that something that more women should be looking at as well? It's like, all right, this is the time where maybe I'm a little bit more hungry. I've got a bit more energy or whatever it is. So let's make the most of it. And then in the phase where I'm not feeling as motivated and driven to do it, and settle it down a little bit.
Yeah. We go about our lives as if we're men, because we live in that world where, we're still not there yet. And I don't say that because I think we just need to lean into our body as a female more and not go about our days as if we are men, because we're not. And to your point, yes, what you do at the beginning of the cycle, the middle of your cycle, and the end of your cycle is going to vary based on what your hormones are doing and what you're capable of at that time. Unfortunately, we still don't know how to lean into that. So we push against it, and then we can experience slow recovery. We can be more fatigued, more hungry, to your point, we've got it all backwards. So definitely everyone's different. I'm not a very good example of this, but I know my body. I know that once my period starts, I'm like, I want to get in, I want to lift heavy things, like I'm good, but most people actually aren't. That's the phase that they want to actually take it really slow and rest. And that's just because your hormones have actually, you're starting again. And then as they build, as you move into the middle part of the cycle, it's when you really should be able to actually really focus on your weight training, recover quicker. You've got you're designed to be able to multitask and do more things in the middle of the cycle.
Yep.
And then when we come back down the other side, it's when we actually go inward again, and maybe we do have more rest days, or maybe we do more gentle movements, also according with how we're feeling. But it means that we can work smarter and not harder. And again, I think we look at it and go, well, if I don't go to the gym today, then I've let myself down and I've fallen off the bandwagon. And I put a post up not long ago. I was like, what happens if falling off the bandwagon was just actually your monthly reset? So I find that women really do their own head in. They're like, I've messed up again. I've stopped doing everything I should be doing. I'm like, you're just about to menstruate. It's only temporary. And then you'll go back and be kind of more diligent again.
Yeah.
Just give yourself grace.
Yeah.
It's really important, but we're still not listening to what our bodies are telling us.
So then external, I guess, to like the training side of things, like that's a pretty easy thing to just be like, yeah, well, minus the mental side of things as well. Like the lifestyle side of taking a day off training versus going in, that's easy to implement. The lifestyle thing of going to your boss and being like, hey, buddy, can I have a day off?
Right.
So what are some strategies that they could look for in everyday life, maybe for you can't just tell your kids you're taking a day off being a mother or,
So true.
being a parent in that case. Like, so what are some things there?
So I think the first thing is tracking your cycle and knowing where you're at, because if you don't know where you're at, you can feel like the world's about to fall apart, and then all of a sudden your period arrives the next day and it solves all the mysteries of the world, and you're like, oh, I actually do like myself. So it's important that we actually do have some awareness of that. I know personally my creativity, and I joke to my team all the time, the day before my period, my creativity is in the toilet. Mm-hmm. Don't ask me to do anything. Don't ask me to create anything. Just I know that if I just give myself grace to do the bare minimum, it comes back, and it comes back better than before. But if I don't do that, it actually kind of trickles into the next month, and I tend to have an average next month. So if I don't know that about myself, and especially, in the work that we do and when we're creating content and doing things where there's a world watching us, if I don't know that, I've had times where I'm like, is this my life now? Am I not creative anymore? I suck at this, I'm doing a terrible job. And actually it's just temporary. Yeah. So really, I think that's really important to know where you are and know how you should be feeling in accordance to your menstrual cycle. And then scaffolding I mentioned. So how do we build around, if let's say we've got a big presentation the day before or at the time of our cycle, I should say, that we know we don't feel great, we do the bare minimum to execute as well as we can. Mm-hmm. So if I had to compete in something, if I had to do a presentation, just do the bare minimum. Don't try and overextend yourself, and just focus on that one task that you need to be able to do. Yeah. If it's, let's say, running a household and you've got children, maybe it's the day that you prepare yourself for pre-cooked meals that you've made, or maybe you get takeout. I don't know, but it's go easy on yourself and
plan
just
ahead a little bit more.
A little bit. Well, we know it's happening.
Yeah.
If you've tracked it enough, you know that it's going to happen. But I do think that there's so many types of devices and things that we can now bring into our lives to track sleep, to your point, to track our menstrual cycle, to track our days, that are actually a game changer. And we don't have to sit there and necessarily have a checklist and be like, oh, where am I at? There's things that do it for us. Yeah. So there's really no excuse when it comes to that. But it does change the game once we know that information. And again, we give ourselves more space to be who we are in that moment.
And I wonder then as well, like to your point, so there's kind of that general planning ahead. Like if your creativeness is pretty low and it's like, well, we've got X amount of content we need to put out in 14 days or something. It's like, well, in these 7 days I'm on, so let's film 14 days of content in 7 days, get it done so I don't have to fucking worry about it for the next 7. Like,
it's so, and I mean, my team now know, and one of my girls, I'm like, got my period, and she's like, oh, all right, we'll just circle back tomorrow. And it's not that I'm not in pain, I'm just not my best self. Yeah. I don't really have period pain anymore, but I was that girl. That used to lie on the bathroom floor and vomit from the pain that I'd be in and pass out, and I'd be sweating, and then have the chills, and I know what that's like. So it's not like it's been a dream the entire time. But I've done, as many of people have done, a lot of work to get it to a point where if that happened, then I'd know there's something really not quite right. And so it's testament also to being able to say, doesn't have to be like that. But at the same time, my team know, just leave me alone. She'll be back tomorrow. Yeah. And also me being, again, giving myself permission to do that, because I think that's probably, society doesn't advocate for
No,
that.
definitely not. Especially not in, I mean, I know from Adelaide, like things are a little bit quieter than they are here as well. You move to the big smoke, the big city, things are moving 100 miles an hour. Like someone's always up earlier than you, someone's always up later than you working. There's always someone that you feel like is doing more than you. So that's quite hard to then take that space.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be more to do, right? But I think B, what I teach people to do, especially patients, is how can I get you to work smarter, not harder? How do I get you to do the least amount possible to be the most productive and to actually win at whatever it is that you're doing? And that takes it takes quite a few things, but I think the first thing is being able to take a step back and really assess what's actually happening, and then being able to not be afraid to make some difficult choices and decisions to see what the outcome might be. I had a patient just today and I said to her, what about if we don't worry about what happens in a month, but what about if we worry about just what happens this week, and creating a routine where you're winding down at nighttime, because she was saying, she's a content creator. She's on her phone until she goes to bed. She's like, I'm on my phone. I know I need to do better. I said, well, don't worry about a month's worth of a regime. Let's just worry about a few days. And let's see if you turned your phone off an hour before and you had a little bit of a nighttime routine, let's just see if you actually achieved less. I bet you actually achieved more. But you have to be brave to try that on in the first place. And I think that's where a lot of us feel like, if I don't do that, I'm going to be left behind. But what if you did it and you actually excelled?
Yeah.
So I think that's like anything in life. I think we have to just take the step in trying these things first. And some of it is an experiment. Even with your health, not everyone has a definitive answer of what's actually happening. No one really knows more than you do. So it's really important to be able to listen to that as well.
Worst case scenario, it didn't work, you go back to what you were doing before because that was comfortable, so cool. And then you reassess and see what else you could try as well. Now you've talked about there, obviously, like you don't think the system is quite set up maybe to optimize for women as well. I wanted to dive down the length of like the general practitioner. Do you think part of that is because, I mean, GPs, they're general, that's kind of to either send you somewhere else or to see a specialist and whatnot. Do you think the system is just because people are seeing the wrong people for the help? Like, not that there's not enough qualified people, they're just in the wrong seat in the first place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think, unfortunately, the story's the same for most people. They have a problem. They go to their GP and their GP often prescribes birth control, and as if that's where it ends. That may or may not be correct. I'm not to say you shouldn't do that. I'm not to say you should do that. But I think often what birth control is being prescribed for, we probably need to be seeing a gynecologist at this point. There's no talk of testing hormones. There's no talk of anything lifestyle related, anything stress. Or maybe there's some conversation about stress, but still. And you know what's interesting? I was having this discussion with someone online just yesterday, and they were arguing that I think that they think doctors just don't have enough time. And I said, I'm watching my daughter. She's in year 10. She's doing a subject called Human Health and Development, and what she's being taught is so far from the truth. I said to her, she said to me, what am I supposed to do? I said, you have to learn the wrong thing. You're going to have to learn the wrong thing to pass this subject, and then I'm going to have to teach you the right thing. How ridiculous. Yeah. They're still teaching archaic nutrition advice, or it's blows my mind. So if they're teaching that at school and they're teaching that when they're at med school, and then that's the information that's being passed on, like the system, we've got to do an upgrade.
Yeah.
We really do need to do an upgrade. So there's so many parts of it that are flawed. And I don't think that I think we go to our doctor, and I really think our doctor wants to help us. That's their job. They signed up to help people. So it's not them doing the wrong thing. They're doing what they're qualified to do.
It's a step before that.
Correct. I think it's the step before that.
Yeah.
But then also having the right next best step. So if there is a teenager coming in for period pain, let's look at why. Let's do some testing. Let's understand what's happening. Or a missing period. Again, let's do some testing. But unfortunately, more often than not, if the GP doesn't have a background in hormone health, they will prescribe birth control because that's what's in their toolkit. So, it's hard. I'm being general here, and I think everyone needs to be treated individually, but I do think it's important that maybe at that point in time a referral takes place for the gynecologist to have a look at what is actually happening. Unfortunately, the toolkit's not that much different. The toolkit is often surgery or birth control. It's not looking at anything else that's actually happening that's going to move the needle the most for these girls or women. So again, we need more conversation around that, more education around that. And I think we're a long way off. I don't think that's happening anytime soon. So there's lots of things I think we have to learn to sit with the advice that we're given and ask ourselves truly, is this the right next step for me?
Yeah.
Which is hard when you're in a world of trouble, because that's why you've gone there in the first place. So, there's lots of moving parts in that, but I think education needs to be upgraded. I think modalities need to talk to each other more. No one's right or wrong. It's just your way, the patient's way, what's best for the patient as well. And I don't say things to scare people. I think it's more about how can we be more curious as to other factors that might be triggering reasons that you're going to the doctor, because what their toolkit has is often medicine, but the problem isn't druggable. The solution isn't a drug.
Yeah.
So that's where I think the problem really lies. So, I feel like every time someone says I'm going to go and get my doctor to have a look at this, I feel like, okay, do that and then come back and let's work out what the other things that you can do that are going to actually move the needle the most.
Yeah, and I wonder whether that's education not just on the GP's point of view or the gynecologist or whatever it is as well. It's like the person coming into that, we all want that to change in one 15-minute consult, and that's why that system also favors the drugs and things like that, because that's what the consumer's always also looking for. Like it's only recently, as I mentioned to you, that, doing a consult with Ben and, like that, a lot of what I'm doing with Ben is it's not kind of like they're not one-off sort of things. It's like we'll reassess in the future, but most people don't want to do the whole reassess. They're like, no, I want you to fix me now. And it's like, until we can reframe that, I wonder if that's part of it.
The information that you've got from Ben, you wouldn't get that.
Oh, no.
Right?
No.
And that's not, I'm not trying to discredit the doctor, but that's not what they're geared up. That's not what they learn to tell you.
They're not studying that every day.
That's right.
Increasing their knowledge base.
And like I said, also the information that you're being given, it's not necessarily a druggable solution. Like the solution isn't druggable. So if that's, there's a lot of gaps. And I think that's a complete disservice to women. And that's why we're in the position that we're in. So often women are prescribed birth control as a solution when I think it could be maybe a short-term solution or not. But what about the bigger picture? And what about their health in the long term? What about their fertility in the long term? I know people shudder at the idea or the words fertility, but fertility, we've made it about pregnancy. Fertility is a state of being where you're healthy. And we've come accustomed to being okay with shutting that down and then turning it on when the time's right. And if we haven't figured this out yet, you can't turn it on and off. It doesn't work like that. I mean, some women you can and they're more or less receptive, but other women are left without a menstrual cycle for years. So I think we just really need to reframe the way we look at women's health. And I'm not blaming a person or a modality. I'm actually just blaming education in general.
Just need to come together and make that and come to a solution as well. So then what are some of the risks of someone that has got had no menstrual cycle and no period for a long period of time? Why is that something people should be worried about? We
say in the industry now it's been termed that your period is your monthly report card. It's a vital sign of health. Obviously, if you don't have your period, there's something not working properly. And so to that point, if something's not working properly and then you use birth control to try and get a cycle, that makes absolutely no sense because it doesn't actually, you don't ovulate when you're taking birth control. Well, the pill, you don't ovulate on the pill, and the bleed that you get is a withdrawal bleed. It's not actually a true period. You can't have a period without ovulating. So you're shutting down the body and then you're shutting down your hormones essentially, and then once a month you're taking yourself off hormones and then you're bleeding and then you're coming back on again and you repeat the cycle. So that's problematic in itself. If you don't have a period, there's always a good reason why you don't have it, and it's important to figure out what that is. Is it that you don't have enough hormones? Is it that your brain is not communicating with your reproductive organs? Is it that there's been high stress and your cortisol has actually taken over? Is it that you have PCOS and you've got your testosterone levels are through the roof. Like, what's the reason first? There's many reasons, and I've mentioned 4 of many, and getting to the real reason why so that you can actually treat it accordingly. We're missing that step very often.
Yeah.
We're not getting our hormones tested. It's especially problematic for teenagers. We know our sex hormones mature at around the age of 21. And so if a teenager is being prescribed birth control, and let's say they take it at the age of 16, and they decide to come off it when they're 26, they are as mature in the sex hormone development as their 16-year-old self, because you've shut that down. So it's no wonder many women have issues when they come off, because if nothing's been done to fix the reason that you took that in the first place, it's going to not only be there, it's going to potentially be worse. So again, I'm not saying you shouldn't take birth control, but that's not the long-term solution necessarily. And that's something that you need to start to explore and get answers for. So firstly, figure out, why is your period offline, or why is development slow? And then you can start to treat it according to exactly what's actually happening. And I can tell you that in almost all instances, there's a solution.
Yeah.
And it doesn't involve medication. It's usually a lifestyle approach, which again is where the system's flawed.
Yeah. So why do you think, like, what is it? Why at 16 does, young girls or parents kind of go, all right, time for birth control? Is it just because that they got told from their parents and cycle repeats itself?
True that. We panic. We don't want our teenagers to have teen pregnancies. We panic if our daughter doesn't have a menstrual cycle and the doctor says, well, let's use birth control so we can try and fire that up, which doesn't happen. But that's what they're told. That's the conversation that's happening often, not always, but often. And I think we want to do the best for our children. So, of course, we're going to follow the advice that we're given, because we don't want our teenage daughters to suffer. We don't want anyone to suffer, really, but we definitely, it's sensitive time. So I think you're right. It's filtered from our parents and what they wanted for us, and then what we want for our children. But I really fundamentally think the issue is actually we're not still having enough conversations with our kids as they mature as to what their bodies are actually doing as they go through puberty, and what to expect and what to look out for. It's been something that's kind of been pushed to the side. So if we're not learning how to read our bodies, we're not learning how to understand what our bodies are doing, and then we go and shut them down at the age of 16, because not only does the pill alter our hormones, it actually alters our brain. It alters our decision making. If you can understand that our hormones actually influence our decision making, what you, as a woman, where your hormones were yesterday and where they are tomorrow are different. So your decisions are actually going to be different based on where you are in your menstrual cycle. If that's not happening, you're actually all of a sudden making different decisions about life, but your brain is acting in a different way. There's a fantastic book, and it's called the Truth About Birth Control. No, I'll have to get the name of that for you. But Dr. Sarah Hill wrote the book, and it's amazing. Your Brain on Birth Control, that's what it's called. And she's gone in, she's a research scientist, and she's gone into the depths of it. It's an excellent read for every parent and anyone really, but to understand how it actually alters what we do and how we live our lives. So again, coming back, I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over, but we really do need to get to the root cause of why something's happening, whether it's a period offline, period pain, delayed periods, acne, whatever it is. We need to look at, okay, what's actually fundamentally happening? What are the hormones at play here, and how can we regulate them better so we're not seeing these symptoms present? Yeah.
And then you've touched on obviously like fertility there, and parents getting scared that they don't want their 16-year-old daughter coming home pregnant. So the better solution, is get a condom rather than that as well.
Well,
like,
here's the thing.
Better education around the sex part of life as well.
I think if young girls aren't taught to understand their fertility when they're fertile and when they're not, you're going to think you can fall pregnant all the time. The reality is you can't. You can only fall pregnant at ovulation.
And a lot of people don't realise that until they try and get pregnant and then realise,
so true. Yeah, so true. I mean, the number of women that will say to me, I'm really embarrassed, I don't know this, and I'm 32. And I'll say it's not your fault. If you've been on birth control since you're 18, you were never going to know this because you've not ovulated for all of that time. So don't feel bad about that. But we're not taught this even in high school. Well, we are, I think, a bit more now, but I certainly wasn't. I was taught, I went to a Catholic school, I was taught have sex, fall pregnant. That's the way it goes. But they were just missing a few really important parts. And
Just
that is
a
you need to be
handful.
ovulating, yeah, right? So I think teaching young girls, even if they do decide to go on birth control later on, understanding their cycles is probably the biggest gift that we can give them.
Yeah.
So then they know when they're fertile and when they're not. Barrier methods I think are important for teenagers to be using regardless. STDs cause massive long-term health implications, and nothing protects you from that other than a barrier method, so a condom. And I also think that I get a lot of I guess sometimes flack about talking about this because mothers will say it's irresponsible to not have a teenager on birth control. This generation of teenagers are actually the most invested in their health. They actually genuinely are invested in living a better life.
Yeah.
And being educated and making good choices than what I'm watching them. They are actually very, very intelligent and very, very socially aware. So I think if you expect your teenager to be unaware, irresponsible, and that's what of course they're gonna feed off exactly what you're expecting for them. So let's expect more from our teenagers and expect them to want to understand their body. Expect them to not. If they don't want to fall pregnant, that they're not going to fall pregnant. They're not stupid. We treat them as if they are, I think, often. So I think really having that foundational education piece is really important. If you were to ask me what I would do with my daughter, if she was sexually active, I would say teach her that first and foremost. Encourage her to always use a barrier method. And if an accident happened, then we've got plan B. You can take the morning after pill, but you'd only take that if you're in your fertile window.
Yeah.
So, you've got 3 or 4 days where you're potentially fertile. If the condom broke at any other time, you can't fall pregnant if you're not ovulating. So I think teaching that is actually the biggest gift. And then if they don't want the responsibility of that when they're older, research does tell us that the more delayed it is that you take birth control, the less problematic it seems to be on hormone fluctuations and hormone and cycles down the track. So letting them get to that point where their hormones have actually, their sex hormones and the communication has actually matured, and then it's up to them at that point.
Yeah, they're an adult now, aren't they?
Right?
So yeah,
absolutely.
And I guess
giving them the power, I think, is very important.
Yeah, and that someone might argue like, plan B or whatever, morning after pill and all that. It's like, at least you're talking about a single medication rather than an ongoing, constantly taking almost every single day medication as well. Like that's a very different situation and a very hard situation to even need to be in the first place still if you've done X, Y, and Z prior.
It's 100% true. I don't think it's ideal, and I don't want anyone relying on
no.
That month after month after month, you might as well be on birth control maybe. I don't know your situation, but we've got options. And I don't think medicine is terrible. I think medicine's amazing when we work out how to use it properly. But unfortunately, a lot of us are medicated for things that we don't that actually there are other solutions for. So that's another point to that. But yeah, you're right. I think that's a great compromise or a great solution. All the while keeping a young woman's health, in the most supported position that they can be in.
Yeah. On the flip side of that then, like probably hopefully not looking at a 16-year-old now, like you move a little bit later, what are some of the things that they're like, I want to have kids and I'm struggling? And are there some things that, is that hormones affecting why that might be the case as well?
I mean, again, what the best thing you can do if you have been trying for a period... Rewind. The best thing you can do is first of all understand what is my body giving me in terms of feedback. Do I have a regular menstrual cycle? Can I figure out when I'm ovulating? Is my cycle balanced? Is my follicular phase, so from my period to when I ovulate, is that enough days? It should really be more than 12. And second part of the cycle, so again, from ovulation to when the period arrives, the luteal phase, that really, again, should be more than 12, more like 14. Looking at where the discrepancies, if you just track that and understand that, you can see without even testing hormones what's actually happening. If it's too short or it's too long, you get a fairly clear indication of what's actually going on. So firstly, what is your menstrual cycle telling you? Is it regular? Can you tell when you're ovulating? Do you have a lot of pain? Is there inflammation? Do you bleed heavily? There's so much information there that would then allow you to work out what's the next best step if you're not falling pregnant. Also, male fertility is a factor that often
definitely
gets missed. So looking at, again, if you've been trying for more than 9 months, I would say, then it's a good time to go and start to explore. Obviously, assessing stress levels. Our sex hormones are taken offline, sheer real estate. When our cortisol and our stress hormones are high, that's a coping mechanism. That's not your body not working. That's your body going, you've got to be kidding me right now. Like,
help.
This is not an environment for fertility and for pregnancy. So it's about assessing stress levels, environment, your nutrition, like all the things that we know we need to assess. But I do, again, feel like the biggest issue women and men face are their stress levels. And coming back to what I said at the beginning, we are unconsciously stressed, and you cannot do anything with that until you become conscious of your stress levels.
Yeah. So what are some, then you've talked about, I think, having a cluttered home or a cluttered workspace and how that can impact, the stress, but then obviously the impact then the downpour of hormones and things like that as well. How big of an impact does that have? That
has a huge impact. We're working out now that a cluttered space, well, you think about how you feel in a cluttered space. Your nervous system is like, it's on, it's up. So minimizing things, it's literally like, how do I simplify my life in every area? One being the environment that I live in. One being also nutrition again. How do I live simply with my nutrition? There's nothing wrong with eating simply. And having sometimes foods, a restaurant meal or whatever, as you don't eat that way every night. But when we do that consistently, our taste buds want more of that rich type of food. So it doesn't mean that it has to taste awful either, by the way. It can actually be really delicious to eat fairly simply. Looking at our sleep isn't something that you touched on. It's one of the biggest things, I think, that, again, a stressed body is not necessarily a sound sleeping body. Looking at what the feedback is there. Toxins are a massive one. So chemicals in our body products, our cleaning products, our what you wash your hair with, what you put on your body. Your skin is your biggest organ, and it will absorb 70% of what you put on it. So I find that to be a big factor. And the other one for women when it comes to toxins is canned tuna. So the can is lined with plastic, and that plastic takes your estrogen somewhere it doesn't need to go, usually very high. Wow. So looking at plastic containers, heating in plastic containers, drinking out of plastic bottles, that alone can have a really big impact. What else am I missing here? There was something else that just came to my mind that's gone again. But there's lots of little stacking things, and I don't want someone listening to this going, "Oh my gosh, that's just so stressful. Where the hell do I start?" You start with one of these things. That's right. Yeah. Pick one. Is it that you are eating canned tuna every day? Look, tuna, don't get me wrong, great source of protein and it's nutritious, but can you find the one in the glass jar? Can you start to prepare it yourself? I eat canned tuna sometimes, don't get me wrong, but I'm not eating it 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Intolerances is the other one that I was thinking of. Again, we touched on that, but that can be a really big factor when it comes to inflammation in the body as well. So we're talking about all the external factors, and my job as a practitioner then is I look at the internal mechanisms that aren't working. So measures of, are you going to the bathroom every day? Do you feel bloated? What's your digestive system like? Pain anywhere in the body? Like these internal mechanisms we need to look at as well when it comes to balancing our hormones.
Yep.
I literally start with bowels for everybody, because if that's not working, you've potentially got hormones that are sitting in the bowels that are being ready to be shipped out. And if that's not happening, they just get reabsorbed, which adds to the pile of a hormone imbalance. So start with your bowels. If your bowels aren't moving properly, then let's figure out why is that. Are you not drinking enough water? Are you not eating enough fiber? Fiber would be the biggest hack when it comes to our health. And we've all heard someone say, oh, have you eaten enough fiber so you go to the toilet? But it's so much more than that. Blood sugar regulation, prebiotic, moving the bowel, detoxification, it's a binder.
Yeah.
Like there's so many reasons why making sure we're having enough fiber is such a hack for women's health. Taking it one step further and eating it at the beginning of a meal has proven to really move the needle with my patients. So there's a book called The Glucose Goddess, The Glucose Revolution via The Glucose Goddess, but I can't pronounce her name. First name's Jessie, and don't even get me to pronounce her second name. Yeah. Game changer. I read that book maybe 2 years ago, and I started trying it on with patients who were already on some type of regime or protocol.
Yeah.
And so just having the fiber at the beginning of the meal to help to regulate blood sugar was undoubtedly just the results that patients were getting. They were coming in and they were saying, I'm sleeping better, my periods are better, I'm moving my bowels better, like all round, probably was the final 20% in their health piece. So fiber first helps to set the stage for digestion to happen in a way that doesn't spike blood sugar. And the flow-on effect is if you're not spiking blood sugar, you're not triggering inflammation, and then for patients, you're not actually contributing to your specific hormone imbalance generally. And it's something you can easily do. So what does that look like? It could be a handful of berries before your breakfast, or a handful of almonds if you can tolerate them. It might be a green salad before your protein. It could be an apple or a carrot whilst you're preparing dinner. But I try and get patients to do this, and it has been phenomenal, the results.
Yeah.
So
is part of that just purely because the deliberate attempt to put it before just means you're more likely to be consistent with it? Or is it also that, like, on top of that though, the timing does play a big role?
It's the timing more than anything.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I've always been massive on fiber. I've talked about fiber for years with patients, so much so that we created a supplement that is it's not a supplement, it's a food-ceutical, but it's predominantly fiber, of soluble and insoluble fibers. But putting it first and really purposely slowing digestion in a way that doesn't, like I said, spike blood sugar. Blood sugar is a trigger for various hormone imbalances. Anyone who has insulin resistance like that will absolutely help them and help to regulate their hormones better. So typically, women with PCOS, this also works very well for. But I would dare say that anyone that did it would feel better. And how do you know if your blood sugar is not regulated? You feel tired in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. So if you're that person that gets to 3 o'clock and you're like, I need to go to the vending machine and get a block of chocolate right now to make it through the rest of the day, that's telling you that your blood sugar is suffering. So I would challenge you, try it on. It's a very easy hack, and see if tomorrow at this time of 3 o'clock, if you feel tired or not. It works that quickly in regulating your blood sugar. So it's just an easy thing. And it's, again, many things we do, it's not necessarily, yes, okay, it's what you're eating, but it's also how and when you're eating it. And so I think that can play a really big part in a very small thing you can do to have quite a profound impact.
Now, rewinding back to the toxins in some of the things, of whether it's our shampoos, conditioners, whatever, is there anything specifically ingredient-wise when we're doing a little quick shimmy of the list that we should be like avoiding, I guess?
I tell you what you do. There's an app, and I got to think of what it's called. It's like Clean something. I'm not good with titles, clearly, but I punch things into that all the time, and it gives me a score because they're constantly changing the name of things, and I sometimes think I'm buying something that is clean and it's not. Yeah. So I think it's something about
I guess companies would be changing ingredients as well if there's some speculation in media.
Absolute known, ingredients, but I'll plug things in and let it tell me whether it's a clean product or not. The other thing a lot of people get caught up on is organic, and so organic doesn't necessarily mean it's better.
It means it's 3 times as expensive,
right? But when it comes to especially products like cleaning products, body products, I would encourage anyone to look at clean, not necessarily organic, because I was speaking to someone last night about this, again, to your point, and they were saying that now companies are hiding the colours that are in cosmetics that are actually known endocrine disruptors. They've figured out a way of just basically not having to say what they are. And I don't know, I have to research this a little bit more, but basically you are consuming things that you really shouldn't be consuming. So it is important, I think, that you get the right information, but I'll get you the name of that app. It's Dirty
We'll put it in the
Clean
description, so it's somewhere there for someone to find.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like I said, I'm terrible clearly with titles of things.
And I guess that comes back to the whole system point as well. Like if companies are able to get away with doing sneaky little things under the carpet like that, it's like, well, where are we trusting in some information as well? Like I like to think that, I'm not running around with a tinfoil hat on all the time, but you do doubt some things when you hear something like that is occurring.
I think it also, to that point, the idea of a conspiracy I feel like there's always some element of truth. I don't think people are that smart to go to these lengths of making up some crazy things. So I think that you're right. Like, to that point, there's always some element. Maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 95%. I don't know. But I feel like, yes, sometimes it's like lean into how you think or feel about something. If you have your body's not stupid. Yeah. It has a reaction to things. To that point, I also say to patients, talk to your body. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it'll give you feedback. Ask it things. Have conversations with yourself and really try and figure out, is this a good thing for me? And you'll be surprised. I know that sounds very woo, but you'll be surprised at the feedback that you'll get.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you've been in your body for a while, like you start to understand like what triggers different things for you as well. And I think to your point as well, saying like no one or no product, no anything knows your body like you do as well. Like I noticed you've got an Oura ring on, I wear a Whoop band. Like there's all these amazing tools that keep us accountable and keep us on top of maybe these different health structures, whatever however you use it. But at the end of the day, it's like, you still got to do the thing.
Absolutely.
You still got to feel how you feel. If you feel absolutely buggered, you probably need more sleep, even if the thing tells you you're really recovered, or maybe you're too stressed. It's like, but I feel like shit. You probably need to do something. Like,
and even to the point of taking supplements. I had a patient today and she said, I feel like this supplement, I can't remember what it was, is making me feel very heavy in the lower part of my body. And I said, well, probably is. I don't know. I'm not in your body. So if that's the case, perhaps let's halve the dose or don't take it for a little while, see what happens. I don't know how you feel in your body. I only know how I feel in mine. But I think the problem is we've been so accustomed to asking for advice for things that we've lost the ability to actually tune in and listen. And we take other people's opinion as our fact when it's actually they're just their opinion. Like when I'm telling a patient something, like, it's just my opinion. Try it on and see. And if it doesn't work, don't keep doing something that's not working.
Yeah.
Like that's insane.
Yeah. In some of those cases then where that lady is saying like it's making her feel that kind of way, would that be looking at the comparison of like, well, is feeling that way still better than prior?
True. And she was feeling better. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, that's an interesting side effect, because it is a side effect. You weren't feeling it before you took it. So everything has an impact or an effect. We've got to work out, yes, to your point, is that better than how you were before, or is it making it worse?
Yeah.
And please, don't take something that is making you feel awful. Like that's, again, your body communicating to you saying this is not for us. Yeah. Not everyone can tolerate everything. We're all different. The way our livers work, the way our gut flora, our diversity, like all of that differs from person to person. So to think that we can just all do one thing collectively is never going to work.
No. When it comes to low body fat percentages and the effects on hormones, specifically, I guess, in that health and fitness space, jumping up on stage, competitive bodybuilding, how dangerous are sports like that for females specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's still, I mentored someone more recently that was a health coach and had competed and had actually done it in a really healthy way, had maintained her period throughout her competition. Yeah, and she's like,
unheard of probably.
Right? She's like, you can do this and I can teach people, but they're very few and far between. I mean, anything that takes your hormones offline is going to have down the line consequences. So I see a lot of ex-athletes, ex-competitors, and often their hormones are a mess.
Yeah.
But it can be done. I think it just needs to have the right support, and that's fairly rare. In general terms, I think it's a horrible idea for long-term health of a woman, but it's also amazing to see what the body can do under certain circumstances, isn't it? So I think, look, if it's something that you are called to do, get the right support in doing it. And if you can maintain your menstrual cycle through that, I mean, it might be a bit inconvenient, but at the same time, if everything lines up and you're ovulating when you're competing, it could be the best thing you ever do. So I think the menstrual cycle is the key point of that. How can you do that and maintain your menstrual cycle? Because you're not actually then messing with your hormones a whole lot either.
Yeah. I guess, a little bit of maybe a touchier subject as well, but like say is that we see more similar things with like eating disorders or things like that as well, like very extreme low body fat percentages messing up the hormones as well, impacting decision making and health in general.
Well, I mean, your fat cells, estrogen is a big part of how that cycle works. So, more estrogen, more fat cells, more estrogen. It's a perpetual circle.
Yeah.
We need body fat to make estrogen, essentially. So if you don't have enough body fat, you will not make enough estrogen, and that's why your menstrual cycle will go offline. So it's maintaining some level of that, I guess. And I don't know, everyone's physique's different as well, so it depends on the person. But to the point of eating disorders, that's the reason why the cycle will disappear, is because they don't have enough body fat to actually make the hormones.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking with the guest I had on earlier, and we were talking about the flip side of that is then someone uses, I've got to make sure my hormones are good. And it's like, yeah, but now you're 15 kilos overweight, using that as an excuse now on the other end to be like, it's okay that I'm overweight because I'm doing it so my hormones are okay. It's like, yeah, well, now we're talking about other issues on the other end. So it would be a bit of, I imagine, a fine line between we want to be a healthy body weight. Healthy doesn't mean you need to be, shredded.
No. And that's a really hard thing for women to wrap their head around. It's a hard thing for me even to wrap my head around as things change. Also, we go through phases, our bodies change. And watching that, and watching especially women that are my age as they start to transition and they go in, perimenopause starts from around 35. Yeah. Most women freak out when they hear that. It's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean you're suddenly infertile. It means that you're stepping into the next era. And that means that your cycles might fluctuate a little bit, but they're still regular. Like, things are still generally the same, but slowly things start to change. You've got to adjust your training as you get older. Like, there's so many little adjustments, and learning what they are is really difficult. And so, I think that we have to still lean in again. What is my menstrual cycle telling me? How old am I? What should be happening with my body at this point in time? And really looking at a lot of the moving parts to figure out what's actually right for me right now.
Yeah.
But not necessarily, it's very difficult. Not only do we live in a men's world as women, we also live in a teen world where that's the ideal body is a teen body. And it's like, that's not even real. So I always say, let's move you. I try to gear women towards a fertile weight. And this is just a guide, but it's usually 100 centimeters off your height in kilograms. So I'm 158 centimeters, so my ideal fertile body weight is around 58 kilos, give or take. Yeah, because we're all a bit different. But just as a general guide, I find that actually better than BMI for patients and a little bit more accurate. And I have had all sorts of things thrown at me for those comments. But I'm like, well, I'm just talking about a fertile weight. So if you're trying to conceive and you are either underweight or overweight, that's a good guide of roughly where you want to be. Yeah. I've really found it's never failed. It's always about right.
Yeah, well. And like to your point though, you're not saying looking at the specifics of other necessary health factors as well. Like right now, that's kind of, let's say that's the goal. Yeah. And you touched on BMI. I find that really interesting, being in that, fitness space myself as well. As soon as someone is a trained person and they have above average muscle mass, we're starting to have the discussion that scale might be a good guide, but like, I'm obese.
Right.
I'm pretty sure I'm not. But it tells me I'm obese. I'm like, I'm not seeing much fat on my body. But, you'd be mindful of that. If you're starting to train and take it more seriously and put on muscle, that's going to change whether these scales are accurate to yourself.
To the point of what we spoke about before, BMI is still a measurement medically.
Yeah, scarily.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Like, again, we're flawed. We're set up to fail at this point in time if we were to consider all those things. So these things are a guide, but I wouldn't be putting all of my eggs in that basket. Yeah. Same as the minus 100 off the height, but it's something that I use as a tool for patients who are wanting to be more fertile or wanting to be more healthy in their weight, maybe have had issues with weight or an eating disorder. It's a nice guide. It's not rigid. Yeah. But it does allow us to kind of go, I wonder what my healthy weight would look like if I had to kind of figure out what that was.
Yeah. So how much does thyroid play a role in all this? That's a lovely term that gets thrown around in the fitness industry. Again, it's like, I can't lose weight because of my thyroid, or these sort of things as well. And obviously medication, is that the slap on for that very quickly? Is that the best way, or is there other options that you see common?
First of all, you have to figure out why your thyroid is not playing the game. So yes, I mean, if you are suffering or experiencing hypothyroid, so low thyroid function, weight gain is a symptom of that. Equally hyperthyroid, you'll lose weight, but you'll feel awful.
Yeah.
You'll feel very awful if it swings over to being overactive. So it is a factor. And if you suffer from a thyroid illness, it's important that you, first of all, get a clear picture of why that is.
Yeah.
The main reason that we see or how we measure factors would be looking at antibodies. So do you present with antibodies against the thyroid and measuring those, and when they are present in higher amounts, and that's the absolute reason why your thyroid's not working properly. So that could be Hashimoto's or Graves' or, a thyroid illness, Sjogren's. But I find with my patients that the most common reason that the thyroid is being impacted is high stress levels.
Yeah.
So they actually don't have an autoimmune disease or illness at all. They're just very stressed, and the thyroid is responding to the stress. Now, that will probably be most people. Your thyroid is sensitive to stress. So, but to the degree that that actually impacts your thyroid is going to vary from person to person. But we do a lot of measuring of thyroid in the clinic just to make sure or see if that's a factor.
Yep.
It is the master controller of your body. Every single cell in your body requires your thyroid to work properly. So it is important to consider if you are experiencing symptoms. But the challenge is that because every single cell in your body needs your thyroid to work, the symptoms are there's the wide and varied, you name it. Exactly. Weight gain or weight loss is just one. Constipation, dry hair, skin and nails, fatigue, insomnia, hair loss, headaches. Like I can keep going and going and going. There's probably like 35, 40 symptoms that can be associated with thyroid insufficiency or thyroid not working properly. So it is important to get a proper, clear picture on that. The problem with thyroid is that typically when we test it, we only generally get a reading of TSH, so thyroid stimulating hormone. So how much message does the pituitary have to send in terms of hormone for the thyroid to work properly?
Yep.
We're not even testing the thyroid at this point. We're actually testing the step before that. Often that comes back okay. Now, if it's coming back okay, but you have all these symptoms, we really need to actually look at, well, what is the thyroid actually doing, and take it the next step down and look at thyroid hormones and where they sit, because they are the ones that tend to be more varied due to high stress levels. So looking at that, and the problem also, back to the system being flawed, is that if you ask your doctor to test for thyroid because you suspect that there's an issue, the pathology lab actually decide how many of those tests are done. So if you want to test TSH, T3, T4, antibodies, the path lab decide based on your TSH and sometimes T4 whether or not to run the rest of those tests. So it's not even if your doctor's asking for the test, you may not be getting all the information, which is why so many people will say, I really think it's my thyroid, but I keep getting told my thyroid's fine.
Yeah.
So A, you're not getting the testing that you need. And then B, the reference ranges for thyroid are old in most circumstances. Again, that falls on the path lab that's doing they make the reference ranges.
So ranges change depending on where you get your test done? Is that?
Yes, they will. The pathology lab will decide. So I think it was 2003, reference ranges were changed, but not all path labs changed that, and not all doctors know that. So the problem is that you actually want someone to be able to interpret your test results, not just read the report. And so if your practitioner that's ordered the test results doesn't know how to do that, you might be told you're fine. Now, the reference ranges pre-2003, let's just say for TSH, were between 0.5 and 5. So long as your TSH sat somewhere between 0.5 and 5, you were considered fine. They functionally should be between 0.5 and 3. So if you're getting a reading of 3, functionally you're at the top end of the range. No, it's not going to feel good. But conventionally, you're actually 2 under the top end of the range. Oh my goodness, no wonder people feel awful, right?
Yeah.
So thyroid's particularly interesting and something I am fairly passionate about because it also has an impact on menstrual cycles as well. But people aren't even being given the information from the beginning. So they're not even going about treating it correctly. And that is a big problem. The closer to 1 you can get your TSH, the better you'll feel. Can you do that without medications? Very often, yes. Sometimes it might be better to take thyroxine or a form of thyroid hormone to get it where we need it, but still do all the other things that you need to do, and then look at transitioning off, which is often what I do with my patients in conjunction with their doctor. I will say, all right, let's get this back in line where it should be. Go back to your doctor, show them your test results, and see if we can get this thyroxine down to the point of not being medicated. Really, what we want for everyone is to be on the lowest to no dose of any medication without symptoms.
Yeah.
Some people can do that and others can't, and I think it depends also on their stress levels, not just the antibodies. So thyroid, there's many things you can do for your thyroid. Stress is important, the right nutrients for your thyroid to function, low inflammation in the body. Antibodies will thrive in the presence of high inflammation. So getting antibodies down is really important, and we do that through lowering inflammation in the body as well through nutrition and lifestyle and whatnot and supplements. But you can live without being medicated. I think the challenge is, again, you will be told if you are diagnosed with a thyroid issue that that's a forever problem and you need to be medicated for the rest of your life. And that's true if you don't do anything different.
Yeah.
But the minute we start to create some variables and we see your thyroid start to improve, then we should be able to transition you off medication.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting conversation with how medication's used then as well. And it's probably maybe a similar argument with things like antidepressants and whatnot, you know. Maybe in the short term it's the best thing because I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jordan Peterson, but I think he may have spoken about this a little bit as well, is that would you rather your patient still be there, especially with antidepressants? There's a lot going on.
Absolutely.
Have it, because I want you here in our next appointment. That's important. But the lazy practitioner goes, happy days, you're all good now.
Right.
The one that cares goes, here's this, I'll see you next week, we've got work to do.
Right.
You know, and it's probably similar here. It's take the medication because in the short term, it's going to change your life.
Right.
But we don't want to be doing that forever because there's other things we can do.
And to that point, as I said at the beginning, when you are in that state of overwhelm, your stress levels are high.
Yeah.
So it could be the piece of the puzzle to get the stress levels down, and then we can actually have room to think about, okay, what's my next best step? And then you dial that in. What's my next best step? And then you dial that in. I was talking to some patients today. I've actually had a theme. I always have a theme with patients on any day, but I said today, you know, it's really interesting when you feel really bad because you're probably not doing anything that's supporting your body, or maybe you're doing a few things, but it's not enough to move the needle, and you actually are feeling crap. You start to turn on yourself. You start to be like, I'm doing nothing and I feel like crap. And that's the result of that is whatever it is that you're experiencing. When you go and do things and your body starts to respond, and you can have some reflection of all the things that A, you're doing, and B, how your body is working better, there's this moment where you're like, I should be so proud of myself because I'm doing all these things and I'm actually feeling better. And it's interesting that the shift that can occur just from doing a few simple things to really pave the next, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? That's lifelong. You have to invest in these things. But I think a lot of us do move around feeling pretty terrible and not doing anything about it, and then blaming our bodies for not performing. So just if anyone's listening, just do one thing, do something, the next best thing. But that might be medication as the first step to then allow you to be able to have the brain space to go, okay, then now what's the next thing I'm going to do? Yeah,
well, it's probably like a lot of things in life. Medication's not a bad thing. Social media is not a bad thing. But if you use it too much and you overuse it, or you're using it for the wrong things, that becomes a bit of a problem. Now, without going too deep into that, you want, the medical industry, obviously it's a massive industry. They want to make money. That's called business. So you can expect that they're going to try and have you be on medication for a longer period of time because it's good for the bank account too.
Sadly true. And I think also the other challenge is that no medicine comes without side effects.
No.
And so often then you need to take something else to counteract the side effect, and then before you know it, you're taking 4 different things. Yeah. So again, it's like, okay, well, what am I taking this for, and what is my long-term solution? I think always thinking about, okay, what's my plan with everything? There's so many things that we do that don't have a long-term plan. Breast implants, what's the long-term plan? Okay, fine, you made the decision. They actually need to be assessed quite frequently, but no one says that. an IUD. For a woman with a IUD, it's like, what's the long-term plan? You can't just set and forget. There has to be follow-up to this. They can migrate, breast implants can leak. Like there's lots of, so what's the long-term plan for anything that we're putting in our body or anything that we're doing so that we can constantly monitor how we're feeling, how our body's responding. I think that's the problem with a medication, is that we think it's a set and forget. I've done that now. I've ticked that box. Yeah, that's just the starting point. Now I need to do things to bring my body back into its optimal state so that I can figure out, do I need to keep taking this or am I actually better now?
Yeah, and I think that's probably for people that are listening that are the consumer on that end, it's like maybe even if your doctor's not leading you down that path, ask the question. Maybe that'll switch something in them, and if they can't give you that answer, then maybe it's time to find someone else.
If you ask questions, it's very interesting what will happen. Your doctor has a duty of care that has to be followed, and often a protocol or a process. But you start asking questions, you'll get options more than, and if you're not getting options, you should probably find another doctor that will give you some options. There's always more than one way to do something. So, I mean, I've experienced this many times. I'll say, I'm hearing you. What else could I do? Or what about this idea? Or what do you think about this? Because I have to find the best way for what feels right for me. And I know patients sit with their health providers and are told that they need to do something and actually feel like every fiber of their being is saying no, yet they do it anyway. And I think there's a difference between being scared but knowing it's the right choice and being scared and knowing it's the wrong choice. And so we need to come back to doing things that might be courageous and scary but knowing that they're the right thing for us. Yeah.
And then, if that is the stage, maybe multiple opinions. And if you're getting all these different opinions and they're still coming back to the same thing, maybe you could start to formulate a bit more of a balanced opinion on that matter as well. Still within that thyroid, I think you've done a post recently about filtered water and the effects on the thyroid. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Water is an interesting one because some water is always better than no water at all.
Better than a Coke.
This is true. Depending on where you live determines what the quality of your water is like. But there are a lot of chemicals in I'm in Melbourne. There's a lot of chemicals in our water, even though they say we have the best water supply. Adelaide water, that's another whole ball game.
No wonder I'm so messed up.
Tastes like bore water. My parents live in Adelaide.
Really?
Every time we go home, my kids are like, oh, do we have to drink their water? I'm like, yeah, you do, guys. Sorry.
That's hilarious because I came here and said the water tastes like shit.
But filtering water is very important. We have medications, specifically the birth control pill, that's not filtered out of our water. Often water's recycled, and other additives and things that are terrible for our hormones and also for our thyroid. So I always encourage where possible for patients to filter their water. It's very, very important, and it can be one small thing you do that has actually quite a big impact on not just your thyroid but your overall health and especially your hormones as well. So there's some amazing filtration, that could just sit on your bench. It doesn't have to be a whole system. Although I would love a system. I think that would be much easier.
Is that the whole reverse osmosis or whatever it is?
Oh, that's another whole thing, like ozone and those. I don't know a whole lot about those. I just know that they're fantastic but really expensive.
Yeah, there's a reason for that because they're good probably. So you're talking then, I don't know, it may be an SA only brand, but like Pure Tap is like that filtered water. It's a separate tap.
Yes.
Is that what we're talking about there?
Yeah. That, or even just a bench top jug. Okay. So I really love Waters Co as a brand that I always advocate for, only because I used to have one of the ones from the supermarket and everyone used to say, Nat, when are you going to upgrade that terrible water filter? And I'm like, yeah, okay, I know I need to do it. So I did some research and it turns out that they seem to have one of the best you can get. But it doesn't have to be expensive. It could just be, you buy it and then it's there and you use it until forever, until it falls apart.
Yeah. Do you have to change the filter on these things, I'm assuming? Otherwise you're like, get all the
But even the fridge filter is better than no filter at all. Okay. Like a lot of fridges have the filter that you get, dispense the water. But I would 100% say, especially for fertility purposes also, filter your water. Yeah.
Are there any other things that kind of those, I guess, really easy switches that people could be making today, in their house?
Yeah, so again, I just talk a lot about toxins because we know there's endocrine disruptors in a lot of our conventional products. Yeah. don't go and throw out the whole cleaning product cabinet, the whole beauty cabinet. Like that would be expensive and stressful. But I say to patients, each time something runs out, find the best version of that product.
Yeah.
We're living at a time where we don't have to compromise on performance of products. Once upon a time, when you bought let's say you bought a low or no tox shampoo and conditioner, it felt like you're washing hair with dishwashing liquid. Like, no. And I ain't swapping something out if it's not going to perform. I feel like also you have a little bit of flexibility. If I have a product that I love, even though I know it's terrible, all the other products are actually not terrible, then that's compromise, right? Yeah. So finding clean products is really important. So when it comes to your cleaning products, each time something runs out, just replace it with a low tox or no tox clean product, because that in itself can have a detrimental effect on your hormones. If you're cleaning the shower with domestos, that is going to be absorbed into your bloodstream and do crazy things. So it's really important that we just make simple switches, but we're not overwhelmed by it. Another switch I would say for hormone health is protein. I don't think we need to eat enough protein. Probably your listeners do. My listeners don't.
Yeah.
But in terms of your hormones are made of fat and protein, so it's really important that I feel like that's the one that most women don't realize is such a game changer for their health, and again for your hormones. So not just for how you operate, but also on a more intricate level. You touched on sleep. I think also we really do need to prioritize our sleep. It's the one thing that we think we can skimp on and still survive. And it's not that you can't, but just try. Like my aura tells me when to go to bed. I don't need a lot of sleep to function. Yeah. I have proven that time and time again. But once I started listening to my data and following it, I was like, oh, I've been missing out on this for a long time. My goodness. So having something or a device to track, I think is actually, you can't go back and get that information. So if you can have something like a Whoop or an Aura, something that can track and give you numbers, I think that's invaluable. I think it's actually the most valuable thing. I can keep giving you things. And the other, to that point, I think this is why blood tests are really important as well. I used to once upon a time say, I don't need a blood test to treat you. And that's still true. I don't need a blood test to treat you. But you can't go back and get that data either. Yeah. So, what your hormones are doing at 28 and what they're doing at 38 are very different. If I had that information, I regret not having that information.
Is that because it gives you some markers of like how things have gone up or down and what has happened within
that time? And look, they're always fluctuating, and a lot of people will be told there's no point. This is my favorite. There's no point testing hormones because they fluctuate all the time. Yes, thanks for that. Like
genius.
Yeah, amazing. If you know how to read them and you know which days to test on, then that's what we do. We keep it consistent. Yeah. So typically a hormone test is done on cycle day 21, so we can capture progesterone because you only make that after you've ovulated. So we need to be testing at the right time. Or 7 days after ovulation. So if someone doesn't have a regular cycle but they can pinpoint when they're ovulating, you would test 7 days after ovulation. Or if you don't have a cycle, it doesn't matter when you test.
Yeah.
You can test at any time. So testing and having that information, I think that's also something that's super important so that you have a reference point and you can continue to monitor that, no different to using your data from your Whoop or your Aura.
Yeah. And I think it's the power of, say, your Whoops, your Aura as well. Like I know I was a big skeptic of them, and now I must say I love my Whoop band. Like I'm happy. It was funny because I started off. It was a little test, I guess you could call it. I was like, I'm going to wear this thing. They did like a 30-day free trial. I'm like, I'm going to wear it to try and prove myself right. I proved myself wrong, but not from. I think my point of like, no algorithm knows me better than my body. I'm very in tune with my body, how food makes me feel. Health and fitness has been a part of my life forever. Mm-hmm. But sleep is the one that I'm willing to push to the side. But whenever I look this thing in the eye, even if I don't check the app, it's screaming, go to fucking bed.
So what happens when you don't sleep enough? I just don't look at my data because I don't want to know. I'm like, I know you're going to tell me something that I don't want to know.
Yeah.
But to the point of that as well, I think the other thing that's really obvious, and I don't know if you've noticed this is the impact of alcohol on your data and the impact of alcohol on fertility as well as something that's really, I find that alcohol mimics estrogen. So really being mindful of that, it can actually really play havoc with women's cycles. But not only that, heart rate, sleep, all of the things.
Yeah, so you name the rest. Yeah.
Right. So
decision making.
Right, all of that. So that's something else when it comes to a hack is women really don't cope well with a lot of alcohol. Men can get away with a little bit more than women before it impacts their fertility.
Yeah.
So it's said that low consumption is what's advised for women who have hormone issues, and low consumption is no more than 2 drinks a week.
Yeah. And I
Don't
think
shoot the messenger.
definition of low consumption would be 2 bottles a week for some people.
Right.
I mean, that measure is different for everyone.
It is, but it's important, I think, for women and for us to talk about that. I mean, I can keep giving little hacks of things that people can do forever, but they're some of the main ones, I think, where we can very easily make some better choices.
Yeah.
One of the things I find with women, especially, in their 30s and beyond, is when they are drinking more, they will have heavier periods because estrogen mimics, alcohol mimics estrogen. Estrogen builds our lining. So heavy bleeding is often associated with too much estrogen in the body, something we've got to clear. So alcohol mimics estrogen. The chemicals that we're talking about mimic estrogen. Some foods, so soy can mimic estrogen. So just knowing this, if you are estrogen dominant or you have too much estrogen proportionately, just cutting that out can actually, or reducing that can actually really change your menstrual cycle.
Yeah, which is quite interesting because I mean, as a bloke, I hear estrogen and go, I want testosterone. But you kind of assume, like, as a female, you're like, well, that's not bad, is it? Like, it's estrogen.
You want it.
You want it. Like, it's, so you assume, I mean, from a bloke's point of view, I'm like, the more the better. I'll take more testosterone.
you want it to be proportionate to your other hormones, and when it's not, it'll either it will, through sheer real estate, mean your other hormones don't get to do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So I would say 90% of women have too much estrogen in their body, and it is pretty much the main thing that we treat or help women to assess and to overcome. And I would say the main symptoms are a heavy period. Ovulation pain is a really big one. And if you have both of those things, then chances are that we need to do some work on regulating your estrogen, which is where the fiber comes in. So all things lead back to, improving that. But just knowing what your body's telling you, knowing if you have a heavy period, what does that mean? Knowing if you have ovulation pain, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, really assessing these things is important.
Perfect. All right, we might wrap things up there. Really appreciate your time, Nat. Lots of value. Once again, as a bloke, I didn't know half of these things, so it's really nice to be made aware of that as well.
If you need some more clarification, you know where I am. Just don't ask me the title of anything, because clearly today I can't speak any titles of any books but thank you so much for having me.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Awesome.